I think I have to say that I stand here this evening feeling extremely nervous, particularly considering the distinguished company present. Certainly others will be able to express themselves far more eloquently than I. I think Jim knows more than most that public speaking could never be considered one of my strengths. Nevertheless, I count it a great honour to have the opportunity to share a few thoughts and memories with you. Although for me, this night is tinged with mixed feelings and emotions, I would say. What I have to say is entirely personal. It's a sincere effort to pay tribute to a man who I hold in the very highest regard. I first came to know Jim in 1970, when as a relatively young man, I moved from Blackpool to savour the life in London. Although one of the main reasons was to join Tottenham Citadel Band, whose reputation was then, and now as Enfield Citadel Band, still is, highly regarded in brass band circles, both in and out of the army. I recall very clearly my first rehearsal. I have to say at this stage that I held Jim in great awe, and I still do. In fact, I'd go so far to say I was frightened of him. And I still am. Anyway, back to my first rehearsal. I arrived as a very nervous and raw, or youngish cornet player, to be made very welcome by a number of the bandsmen. It was suggested that I sit at the bottom end of the front row cornet section, and this I dutifully did. Jim duly arrived and we had a friendly chat. So I started to feel more relaxed and at ease, or so I thought. At this point, Jim said, "Right, you sit down, my boy," pointing to the principal cornet chair, which I noticed was vacant. What became more apparent as the clock moved towards 8 o'clock is that the rest of the front row cornet chairs were also vacant. The strange thing, though, is that the rest of the band was in full attendance. I have to confess that I'm still not sure to this day whether this was a planned event. I think you probably draw your own conclusions. You may consider that at this point I was becoming more than concerned. And you would be right. Where were the rest of them? What's going on? Never mind. Jim clearly recognized my increasing panic and very quickly allayed all my fears by suggesting that we should have a quick canter through some music. First up on the stand was My Strength, My Tower. What am I doing here, I'm saying? Have you seen this before, my boy? He asked. To which I nervously responded, no. Oh, good, he said, you really enjoy this. The rest of the evening continued in a similar vein, judging by the selection of other straightforward and simple festival series test pieces, like the Holy War and those sort of things. So that was my very first experience of a rehearsal under Jim's leadership. At that time, Jim had been the bandmaster for 10 years, and I very much regret that I wasn't part of those years. Nevertheless, that was the beginning of 23 years of my life which were totally priceless. I count myself so hugely privileged to have served under Jim's inspired guidance and leadership, and by that, I don't just mean in the brass banding training terms. That issue is simply not in debate. Jim is a deeply spiritual man, and as a consequence is able to read and interpret the deepest and most innermost meanings of a composer's intentions. Although in the early days perhaps this was to some extent lost on me. Thankfully, through Jim's nurturing, I achieved a greater understanding in terms of making music speak, particularly considering the true purpose of our music making. This very much relates to the band's motto, the best for the highest. The memorable experiences that I enjoyed are too numerous to mention, but I do recall one particular moment many years ago which has stayed with me. A moment which didn't happen in any of the major army festivals throughout the world in which we played, but in a rehearsal. We were rehearsing None Other Name, which, as many of you know, contains the chorus, Jesus is the sweetest name I know, in the form of a cornet solo. I played the tune, of course, but perhaps more accurately the notes, after which Jim looked at me and quoted the words associated with the tune, and then said, listen, always remember, what's in here comes out in your playing. Now, I thought about that. I think at the time I wasn't sure what he meant, but I came to understand, and I understand now. Jim's understanding of our, or my, weaknesses was uncanny, but he has an unparalleled ability to extract the very best out of the players under his direction. To be a Salvation Army bandmaster has to be a tough job by any standards, requiring many attributes, including resilience, patience, compassion, commitment, musical ability, and of course the absolute need to lead by example. For me, Jim epitomizes all those values and many more, which make him absolutely unique. And I would go so far as saying that what he has achieved in all those areas will never be equaled. I have been so fortunate to be part of this great band, and it is has been my privilege to serve under Jim. Whilst this is a celebration to Jim, and not as an afterthought, I'd like to pay tribute to the wonderful support Jim has had from Elsie over the years. Her unselfish and committed contribution to Jim and the band, through the good and the difficult times, I know is immeasurable. Their home has always been open to me and the family, particularly when the children were smaller, and the kindness and generosity shown to us will never be forgotten. I think at this stage, the band have a presentation to make, so I'll take one step back for a second. I've nearly finished, you'll be pleased to know, but I'll close by paying tribute to a man who, with the exception of my father, who's here tonight, God bless him, has had more influence on my life than any other man. Jim, thank you.